talkshoe.
Recorded live.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Idiot Engine. Today our topic is color and how it colors our perception. I'm Ted Seko, and I do comic books, cartoons, mini comics, and you can see my work at tedseko.com. My co-host for this episode, it's her second time on the engine, and as I said the first time she was on, she's the first lady that was ever on the engine. So especially since she's doing it again, I think she should be dubbed the first lady of the Idiot Engine. Mary Bellamy. Mary, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where they can find you?
Okay, I've been working in independent comics since about 1999 with Radio Comics, Antarctic Press, Shanda Fantasy Arts, Slave Labor, and a few other small companies. I've done some freelance and animation with the Drew Carey Green Screen Show and some work with Titmouse. My website is marybellamy.com, and pretty much you can find me anywhere on, Twitter. I'm Zorilita. I'm on Facebook under Mary Zorilita Bellamy, and that's about it.
Oh, okay, cool. Just to kind of keep people posted, you're doing, you've got a gallery show you're participating in, and you're also going to be doing Comic-Con pretty soon, right?
Yes. I'm with the Girls Drawin Girls, and we have an art show, The Sugar and Spice, celebrating our third volume of our art book. It's going to be up in Burbank on the 9th. I don't have the details right in front of me, but if you look up Girls Drawin Girls, it'll be on our main website.
Cool.
And then
you're
at
going to be
Comic-Con.
at Comic-Con.
Yeah, at Comic-Con, I'll be in the small press area, table N4. Just look for Zorilita Mary Bellamy. And I'll be debuting my new plush toys and volumes 2 of Faux Facts and Aw Heck.
You know, I saw some samples of your pages. You showed them me the other day, and those new issues look great. The first issues you did were great, but this new stuff, and that's actually one reason that I asked you to co-host this episode. The color that you did in these latest books that you put together, it's really, it's really knockout stuff.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, your first stuff's great, but this other stuff that you've been doing, it's just at a whole new level. So, well, let's get to the topic, huh?
Okay.
Okay, so color and how it colors our perception. I'll tell you right off the bat, I don't work in color that much. I'll do covers in color, but most of my comic book work is done in black and white, and that's because it's cheaper. And so I've done it that way ever since I first started self-publishing.
Well, you're not alone. When I first started, my first books were in black and white. When I started out with Manga File and Shanda Fantasy, everything was in black and white. And so the most I did at that time was some grayscale, like halftone, kind of zip-a-tone, screen tone thing. But I think with the advent of print on demand, the prices come down so low that the common person can now print books in color.
There's not much of a difference in price in between using a POD for black and white and then using them for color?
Well, it's a few more dollars a unit.
Yeah.
But it's so much more manageable than if I was to, say, go to a real company and, print off, 1,000 books. It would be, the price would be too impossible for me to handle because I'm small press.
And what would you say, since you've done both, since you've done black and white and you're choosing to do color now, what would you say is the biggest difference in doing color than black and white?
Well,
I know it's sort of a very obvious question, but I'm kind of curious.
Well, black and white, you really have to have really strong line art. Not to say that color doesn't, but you have to have really strong line art. It has to read right away. And, with color, you can fill out volumes a little better. Say you had, 3 levels of shading. But with, a background, a black and white, you had either, black, white, or maybe a grayscale, but that's it. Whereas color can give it a little more volume, and then the atmosphere can change just with the colors you use.
Oh, yeah, and also the fact that you've got basically, like you said, kind of black, white, and gray and a black and white book, if you try to do multiple gray layers, sometimes it would just
it'll get muddy. It'll get muddy.
Yeah.
If you get above a 40% gray, I think it is, it starts to really turn murky.
Mhm.
Whereas
So
with
pretty
colors,
much,
you can have two hues that are different, but they're the same value, and it won't be an issue, whereas it would be in black and white.
yeah, yeah. Huh. So, would you say that there's advantage then that you have doing color over? I'm trying to think of it like a really hot, like Frank Miller. You know, he does a lot of black and white stuff.
Well, I think it
Right.
really just depends on what it is you're doing. Like sometimes the
Mhm.
stories they don't call for color. So his stuff is more edgy and black and white kind of fits that a bit more. Or maybe with a spot color or two, like if there's blood or something, have big red on the page.
Yeah, yeah.
But like when you're doing kid-friendly stuff like I do, color is just a lot more appealing
Mhm.
than just pure black and white because the kids like to see the bright colors and things like that. And I like to do a lot of shading and highlights, which you can't always get as much with the grayscale.
Yeah. You know, that's a good point. I know when I was doing Billy Cole, that was the first series I ever had. It's just basically a story about a little baby who fights evil. It's a very basic story, and that was done in black and white, but very sheer black and white. Like I didn't use any grayscales, and it felt right because the story was Billy Cole. He's like an innocent, and then his opponent was evil. You know, literally that was his name, but he was just pure evil. So it's you have good and innocent versus evil. The stories were very simple. It's not necessarily for kids, but it was a very sort of straightforward story. And so I think you're right. I think if the story calls for it, black and white, it's perfect. My art editor, the one piece of instruction he gave me when I first started working at Billy Cole, he just told me, he said, Ted, because I gave him all these ideas, like, oh, I'm going to do this, I want to do this, this, and this. And he said, Ted, keep it simple.
Yeah, you always want to keep it simple.
Yeah, and that was the best piece of advice, and that fit perfectly with the medium, the black and white medium.
Yeah.
So, the other thing, you said your work it's kid-friendly work, and it is, but one thing that's really interesting about it is it's actually kind of multi-layered.
Yes,
I think,
yes.
you can appreciate it on the surface level, but then there's also there's a little bit of edginess to it. I think adults can appreciate it. And those colors, it fits because you have sort of these kind of multi-levels that you can appreciate it at. And your artwork, the colors have many kind of shades of, you have a lot, you're using different shades. And
Right. Yeah, I try to tint, like, say in Ah Heck 2, she goes to yet a couple more sections of the underworld, and each section, like in Volume 1, kind of has its own color tint to it. So when she goes to see the succubus, basically everything has this kind of a violet shade to it. Whereas like when she saw Oliver, everything was like a green. When she went to see Heck, everything was like a light pink. And then when she finally goes to the last place, everyth's more blue.
Oh, okay, so that's, you're not just going like local color, you're going with a specific, you have a specific plan.
Yeah.
Now, the blue and the choices of colors, like you said, the last chapter you said that was going to be like tints of blue?
Yes, because it's cold and empty and abandoned and lonely.
Oh, okay.
It's more of a cooler color rather than an active color. Now, things will change in Volume 3, but Volume 2, the story kind of seems like it's coming to an end. It's kind of a false ending.
Yeah. Oh, so certain colors really do really can elicit kind of certain feelings from the viewer.
Right.
Like blue is kind of cool and tends to give the reader like a feeling of loneliness or sort of isolation, you think?
Yes. And like in the first volume, I used green when she first dies because we kind of think of green as a sickly color. So it foreshadows her dying.
The color foreshadows something that happens in the story. That's interesting.
Yes.
Huh. So you planned this out at a very early stage in the project?
Well, for me, color is kind of instinctive. I thought it added a nice extra layer to it. Originally, I didn't start out planning it per se, but then I thought, well, since they're all unique individual sections, what if each area had their own motif?
So you have to see what the basic feel or atmosphere of that section is. And then you pick the color from that.
Yeah, and then going from there.
Huh. That's really neat. That really is interesting. When I'm working on a project, I'm basically just thinking, events. I think of mood, but, with black and white, you can go heavy, like heavy blacks, and that'll create a mood, or very sparse blacks, so it's very light. That creates a mood. But I guess with color, you can go,
You have a lot more options.
And warm. Yeah, cool and warm, and like light, strong value and weak values.
And I went a little differently with Faux Facts. That's my more kid-friendly book. I did less of the atmosphere color and more of the characters in the foreground are warmer with their shading, and then the characters in the background are cooler, so they kind of recede to the back where they belong, so there's not competing as much.
Okay, so that was something that you just did through the whole thing, not just for specific chapters.
To show focal points more. On that one, that was more simplistic because the stories aren't as complex as Aw Heck is.
Okay, and I guess that would be easier for like kids to get. Like the warm is in the foreground, the cool is in the back, so it's just easier for them to see.
Right.
I know, like in like kids' stories and stuff, they'll do that. It seems like the main character, the figure is very prominent, and then everything is in the background. It's a very simple composition, but I guess it reads very quickly, for kids. Huh. So did you always appreciate color, like when you were reading comics and when you were a fan, or did you read like black and white comics, or were you always just kind of?
Well, truthfully, I didn't read a lot of comics. The only comics I read as a kid were those kind of adaptions that Marvel did of like cartoons, like they had Strawberry Shortcake and like, Top Dog and Fraggle Rock. The stuff that I forget the line. It was like Marvel Kids or Marvel Star or something like that.
Yeah, Star. I think it was like Star Comics or something.
Yeah, they would do those adaptions. Those are the only comics that I read. But I read mostly those picture books that the kids get from like Golden and the adaptions of the television show, because TV is definitely where I liked color from. I mean, if you go and you look at a lot of the 80s stuff, it was all very bright colors. And that really attracted me.
Yeah, so that's what you were kind of bred on, was the
cartoons.
Like Gem or
Gem, My Little Pony, Rainbow Bright. All the stuff that predates anime in America is really where I actually got it. I ended up liking anime because it was so similar to the 80s stuff, where by the 90s I think they started to use less saturated colors in a lot of the cartoons, and it was okay, but it didn't have the same appeal to me. That's why I went off of anime for a while.
Oh, okay. What was like? I know that you watched these as a kid, but can you think of any particular cartoon, any specific cartoon that like the color was really, really good?
Well, it depends on the definition of good. It's just something that's eye-catching, because I don't really base any of my stuff on what I've seen. But I liked just the saturated colors, like in My Little Pony and Rainbow Bright. Things like that seemed more interesting, and the fact that you could use a lot more colors.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s cartoons, or as opposed to the 90s, I guess it was budgetary things, so they really, really simplified everything. And, it just kind of made me start looking at stuff like, later I started to look at classical art and things like Art Nouveau and the way they had the kind of the watercolors. You still had some saturation, but it kind of gradated out into like more muted colors. And it just you just kind of you start noticing more things like that.
Yeah. And
all around you.
That you can apply that to your own work.
Because I started first primarily with markers. I think everybody in the 90s had to have a set of Pentel markers. That was
I remember those.
The big thing, the big set of 36 markers. They were like gourmet markers of the art world. And everyone was coloring the little magical color-in sheets and stuff like that. And that's where I first started to say, oh, hey, it's more colors than the lame little Crayola, markers.
Yeah.
And then I started to move into, everyone discovered Prisma pencils. So we all started using Prismacolors, and we could layer colors and smooth them out. And I started to do a lot of commissions and things like that. I touched into watercolors a bit, and I was able to get good color, but the technique wasn't as strong. And then came Photoshop, where everybody and their mother could like mix colors and start coloring on the computer.
Yeah.
And I think it's some.
I was going to say, you still do actual hand-done color, though, right?
Yes.
I saw your sketch cards.
Yeah, all my sketch cards. I still use like Prisma markers and pencils. Those are like original art, but if I want to do mass-produced art, it's all about Photoshop because it's just very hard to reproduce traditional media because the colors oversaturate with certain scanners or fade out, and you just can't get the likeness without twiddling with the levels and the hue saturation and all that.
Mhm.
It's kind of a pain.
Well, yeah, you showed me yesterday. Those sketch cards that you did they were really. I mean, it looked amazing. You said they were all marker, like pen.
Yes, markers and microns.
Okay, because the mixing and everything, it looked like you had done that. I don't know, like with a computer, and you just printed them out, but they were actually hand done.
Yeah, I use smooth paper. That way, the ink in front of the Prisma markers is smooth, and it goes a lot streak free. A lot of the other markers leave a lot of streaks, but these ones are more smooth. I guess it's like alcohol-based or something, so it glides across a lot easier.
What do you think of, you mentioned the Frank Miller, how he would use, like, limited color? Or, like, he'll just put, like,
I'm not really an expert on his stuff. I haven't seen much of it, but based on the movie, I think it was mostly black and white muted out, and then, like, the blood was bright red. And I think that's used more as a symbol. A lot of indie books do that, like
using color just symbolically and not for creating atmosphere. You mean, or?
Well, some use it for symbolic, and some use it as a way to break up the black and white without having to go out and highlight and shade and all that other type of thing. Like I think it was Salamander Dream by maybe I'm going to get this wrong, Hope Larson. I'm not sure. Like her books, I know that she would have a spot color. Like there'd be the black and white line art, but then she'd have like some green in a tree or behind something. And it's just a way to make it a little more visually interesting without it being full-blown color.
Well, I know sometimes, you can do like a small little effect to really make something stand out. There's a movie, it was a independent, I think it was a French movie, it was a French short that the 12 Monkeys was based on. Yeah, I remember watching that on YouTube. It's on there. You can do a search for it. And it was interesting because that whole movie is done just like with pictures.
Mhm.
You know, they're just a photo and then a still photo and then another still photo. But there's one moment in that short where you actually see movement. It's a scene, I think there's a woman and she moves her hand or something.
Yeah.
And that little movement, that like pops out at you. So I guess it's the same thing, like maybe somebody like Frank Miller or somebody that uses black and white, if they just drop in one piece of color, it's one of those moments where, boom, you know, all your eyes go to that, you know. But yeah, I guess that is using color in a different way than say you would do it. You know, it's not really defining shape or, you know, creating a lot of mood. I guess it is sort of creating mood, but it is done just to basically get your center of interest to go right there. You know, just focus right on that moment. That's really interesting. I remember in school we would we had a class. It was an art class, and then we started talking about, was it the Impressionists?
Yes, very color centric.
Yeah, and they didn't draw with lines. They defined everything not with lines but with color.
Right, like Mary Cassatt.
Yeah, and you look at it far away and you can see the forms, but then you go right up close and it's just blotches of color, you know, next to each other.
Yes.
You know, and I don't know, that's
another one that's kind of interesting is Fauvism. Have you heard of Fauvism?
I remember that, but I don't remember.
They use color more in a. They use ridiculous color in the sense like the sky is bright red and the grass is purple, things that are nonsensical.
Mm-hmm.
But it still has an impact because they used color in a different way than it was expected.
Yeah. Well, I know even when I watch TV or movies, I can see kind of like what you're saying, how you'll, you know, each chapter in your story has this kind of a dominant kind of color to it. I'll watch some movies and they seem like like all like orangey, like what's his name? Spielberg. I remember it seemed like all of his movies at one point, they were all like sunset. Like everything was taking place during the sunset because it was warm and kind of, you know, homey and really yeah, really heartwarming stuff. So yeah, so I guess they do that everywhere. That's something maybe, you're right. I mean, PODs are making it much more affordable to do color. Does it take you longer to work in color than to say like when you were working in black and white?
Yeah, probably. The actual coloring takes a while longer, the filling and the shading, but I think it really depends because black and white you have to think more about spot blacks and you have to think more about how can I bring this back. Whereas in color, okay, her shirt is green, her hair is blue, and her skin is this, and you know the same color for every single panel. It's not going to change.
Well, and then you can bring something. You can bring something back or forward in the frame, not just using blacks as like a cash out, but you can do it with color.
Right. That and you generally want your character to be a little more saturated than your backgrounds because if you oversaturate the color in your backgrounds, it gets lost. And to me, an example of that would be a cartoon called Totally Spies, where everything is like candy colored. The characters
the background and the characters.
And the characters. It's just like overly the same color. So when they're against it, I mean, you can see the character, but it's like if you weren't focusing, you'd probably lose sight of it. Save for their horrible voice acting. But, the artistically speaking, stuff like that bothers me. It's like...
Well, it's hard to follow. It's hard to kind of...
Right. It's just kind of too much. It's like too much information. It's like sometimes simplicity is better than too many details.
I guess even with, that extra tool of color, you still have to follow the basic concept of, foreground, background. You don't want to...
Color can help you and hurt you. If you don't know what you're doing with it, it can really muck up your stuff. I mean, as much as I liked Rainbow Bright, people don't understand and they'll just start making everything rainbow colors. There's still basic theory and harmony, like within a character, like, you have analogous color schemes, which is like colors right next to each other on the color wheel. So you can go in and have like a yellow, orange, red, orange, and it'll be harmonious. But you don't want to have like orange and then purple and then like yellow polka dots. It'd be kind of weird.
You mean next to each other,
right?
Like if on a costume, because then that would make the costume.
It would start to look more garish. It would look more garish than you want. You kind of want to. You don't want to have too many colors. You kind of want to limit your palette on, especially if you're on your character. Like if you have like a pink, the inside of his ears are pink or something. Like say you have a rabbit. You maybe want his ears, the inside of his ears, to be the same pink as maybe it's on his fingertips, as maybe it's on his nose.
I see.
If you keep, like, if there's too many shades of a certain thing, in certain styles, it gets to be visually cluttered.
Even if they're the same color, but they're just different shades, that still is too busy, you're saying?
Basically, you can change the color by shading it. Like, you can put a shadow over it, and that changes the color. But if you're using too many different base colors, it kind of gets to be too cluttered. You want to be a little more conservative with it.
Well, I remember in school, because that was quite a while ago. I have a lot of gray hairs. But I remember somebody, maybe an instructor was saying something about, when you're coloring, when you're painting or something, and you're using, just say you're using a color on the figure, it is nice to put a little bit of that color on the figure in the background. Not an equal amount. Right. But a little bit out there. Just
change the value a little bit, like fade it out or something.
But still keep it, use the limited palette.
Well, it's a little bit different because an illustration is just meant to be seen as one thing, whereas a comic, you don't want to do that totally because it'll kind of fade into one big image. You want to still have the focal point be your character or whatever is going on in the scene.
Well, clarity is really one of the priorities, right? In making comic books. So you want to use everything to help make the story clear. So you want to use, I guess, your composition, your color. Because you don't want to be like Lisa Frank folders. As cool as those were in the 80s, it's probably not a good model for a comic to be like Lisa Frank. You know who that is, right? Tell me more.
Lisa Frank is a really popular illustrator who did these very bright, very saturated, rainbow-colored folders, like with unicorns and puppies, and it was just like a rainbow. it's like a rainbow that exploded on the page.
Okay.
So I mean,
And
while that's nice in marketing,
yeah.
that's generally not a color theory you want to follow when you're doing your own stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, it may work for some people, but generally
yeah.
in a comic, it's like color overload.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, with any of these tools that we have as artists and storytellers, you don't want to, you don't want to like throw everything in the kitchen sink.
Just
in
because
every
you
panel.
can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, so that really goes for color too. I know whenever I try to do some painting, and I'm trying to get back into it a little bit. I'll end up, start. I was painting. I was doing a painting of the bionic Bigfoot from $6 Million Man, and he was fighting. Who was he fighting? He was fighting Maskatron from the $6 Million Man, and I was, I sketched it, and then I started painting it, with acrylics, and first I did local color. Like I said, okay, he's gray, he's a robot, so I just made him gray, and then okay, Bigfoot's brown, so he's brown, and then I just started randomly picking colors, like, oh, maybe yellow would be good in the background, and I do that. No, well, I better put a little bit of shadow. So I don't know, how do I make a shadow? I guess I'll use blue, dark blue, and it was just a big mess. It was a big mess.
You got to think about the environment. Well, illustration and comics are a bit different. Sometimes they can affect, but like my style is more simplistic. But like the more comic book style art, if you've got an orange light behind a character, you're going to want some cast light on the edges of the form of your robot, and the other side might be a little more darker, so the shadowing could be purplish, to balance it out.
Do you use colored lights? Because I know some of the really great art that I loved. It was on the cover of these monster magazines, and they used to do really garish things. I mean, they would have, say, Frankenstein, but they would paint it with Frankenstein, maybe with like a really orange light, strong light. So he, half his face would be orange, and the other half of his face would be something else. Do you use colored light in your work?
Not really. I've done some like illustration work that's not comic stuff where there'll be cast light, but not really that bold. I'm more subtle when it comes to that stuff.
Okay.
I just use a lot more shading, like in Photoshop, layer upon layer of shading set to like multiply or overlay or screen, just to give it a different volume rather than more of a painted look. I don't really do paint much, but that's the kind of style I do.
I picked up today. I was at the local comic shop, and I was in the dollar bin, and I picked up this really amazing. It was a romance comic from DC Comics from the early 70s. And what struck me about that was the color. Like, they were doing things where, the foreground character was yellow and the background was, like, pink, and no local color at all. There were just these big blocks of color. And that's something I thought, oh, maybe, you know what? I think that's really interesting. They're not even... I guess they're conscious of the local color, but they're not using local color. They're using color in and of itself to move the eye.
Also, some of it was that they had, I forget what the colors were, like Dick Blick colors or something like, I can't think of what it was called.
Oh, yeah.
They had a certain inking, and they didn't have the ability to mix it as gradated as we do now. So they had to be really strategic with the colors they used because they didn't have as much of a range as we have now with like Photoshop.
Well, I'll tell you, Mary, the old stuff, they had a limited color palette, but for me, that was one of those things where, these are kid stories, whatever, Superman or Spider-Man, and those limited color palettes worked really nice, I thought, for those kind of simplistic stories.
Yeah, you just have to be careful. Some of the 80s stuff, there was these lobster people. The colors were so saturated that the women would be white, but they'd be like pink. And instead of like a light blush, they'd bright purple on their cheeks. They're just like overcooked hot dogs or something.
You know what? I remember what happened in I think it was in the 80s. They switched over to a premium kind of paper, like a premium format paper where it was like really white, and the color looked. Yeah, it was really like, I don't know, it was really bright and kind of flat or something. And I think that's because before, the premium paper, they were using newsprint, so that has like a warm kind of not sepia, but kind of a warm color to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that newsprint, that paper stock, made a difference because that paper stock had a color.
Well, see, that's the other thing with color is you want to know exactly what kind of paper you're printing on.
Mhm.
Because I know a lot of the independents, they don't use bright white, and the ones that use spot color, you almost have like a fourth color, the black, white, the black, the neutral, and the color. So you almost have like 3 colors just by having the paper color alone.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think I actually preferred printing out some of my work on, they don't really sell newsprint for Xerox machines. I tried it once. I got some newsprint. I got a pad of like kids newsprint, like a sketch pad.
Yeah, it doesn't last very long.
Well, what happens is I cut it to 8.5 by 11, and I fed it in the machine, and the newsprint was very floppy, so it kept on getting stuck. You know?
See, what you want to do with that is, this is why I love Photoshop. You could always take that newsprint, scan it in, and then multiply it over your artwork in Photoshop, and it gives it a cool textured look. So it almost looks like traditional media when it isn't.
That's a good. What's a really good idea is some of my old comics. I love them because they were like from the 60s or 70s. So the newsprint has actually turned almost like a golden color. Because it gets old, and I love that. I love the way that color, affects the actual coloring of the book. So what I might do. If I do, if I do a color book, is I can scan that actual newsprint comic in my computer and then just use the eyedropper and like just pick it and color select it and then use that as a base for my my own color work. That's a neat idea.
Yeah, you really just got to play with certain things and experiment. Colors usually not going to be like, the first color choice works. I mean.
Yeah.
When I first started creating my characters, I like, I want this, and that, and it ended up being too much. And it's like, okay, what if I change this? What if I use it? Because like when I shade in the comics, I use one solid color. But when I first started doing Faux Facts, like the first book, I would start and I would shade everything in gray. Then I would select, say, like everything that was red on the page, and I'd take it in hue saturate and change everything that's red and make that shade like a warmer color, and everything was blue, did the same, and it just took so long. And I think it kind of lost a lot of its impact because I was too busy trying to make it warm for each color or cool. But it didn't have the same impact as when I used a solid color that was warm. So it's one of those things where you experiment and you see what's worked stronger.
Yeah. Well, I think that's you know what? I'm still stuck on this whole thing about that newsprint color. I totally want to try that now. Like after talking to you about this, I totally want to try it because I really do think one reason I like old comics is because this is just sort of my preference. I like kind of rich colors, like deep, warm colors. I sort of prefer that. That's just something that I think looks good. And yeah, those old comics, they're on that newsprint that's kind of golden, and it makes all the colors on top of it just seem vibrant and
And then you can fake it and then put it through Photoshop, and then it's a color book, but it's not actually because you just tweaked it.
Yeah, the other thing is I primarily work in black and white, and I'll look at my books and I enjoy them and everything, but there is sort of a coldness to it because it's black and white. Black
and then
and
you
white.
can actually take the black and tweak it in Photoshop and maybe give it a sepia tone to it. And that way it looks a little older or different than just plain black and white. So just by changing the color of your inking, it can totally change the feel of your art.
I did that I make some flash cartoons. And when I make my flash cartoons, they're kind of like, I call them comic tunes because I don't have a lot of animation in them. I have a little bit, but when I make a flash cartoon, I basically, I'm drawing every frame. So I'm drawing it, and I'm drawing it kind of like I draw a comic book. I use black, and I do color, but, the line work is all black. But what I do and I've done this probably since since I first started doing these flash cartoons. I don't pick black. I pick kind of this. It looks sort of like a brownish black, but it's like next to the black on that color, the squares. The set, whatever you call them, little.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Color select.
Yeah, and it just feels better because, for me, black and white, that's what I use. I've always done that, and I really do feel there's a lot that you can do with it, and there's still more that we can learn from black and white. But it inherently feels cold.
Right. Well, you just have to learn the balance. Like once you've really got a handle on black and white and being able to know what works to get your point across, then it's easier to go to color, because with color everyone's just tempted to just dump in every color under the sun.
Well, that's the bad thing about a lot of bad coloring nowadays is it's muddy. They're using like a million colors, and you can't see anything.
Right.
It just gets muddy. Everything is muddy. The foreground figure blends into the background, and you can't see expressions. I mean, I've seen some pages, some images where you can barely kind of make out what the person's face is because they've got all these shadows,
I think that's why I tend to gravitate more to cartoony art, more with like a solid shade and a solid highlight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if you checked out the Darkwing Duck comic. I think that one was very true to the kind of animated style, and I kind of like that style above many other styles in coloring because it's just iconic. You look at it, you see it, it's very clear. And even if a character had like plaid on I think Gosling's skirt had plaid, it's not drawn in black, so it's got color. So it just reads really easily.
Let me ask you this. When you do your color work, well, actually, this is just, I guess it kind of applies to my stuff because I go pretty heavy with black, when I'm doing my black and white work. Would you say, when I'm doing color, should I approach it where, okay, I'm going to do my regular way, so I'm going to go really heavy on the blacks, kind of like Frank Miller, and then after that, then I go in with color. Or if I know it's going to be in color, do I consider that and then pull back on the blacks?
That's what
knowing
I do.
That I can. Okay.
That's
so
what I do.
Because
if you go too heavy with the black, you're almost overkilling it with color. There's just too much.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's too stark. It's one thing if a character's standing in the shadows or something, and there's like a black silhouette, and maybe the sky behind him has a gradated like violet to blue or something. That's one thing. But if you've got like a character's got his whole face is almost totally black shadow, it's almost pointless to have like color and shadows underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
So I might go back and just go back on the shading and really pull it down on the inking.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just my method. I mean, everyone has their own method, and depending on what your style of art is, I mean, I take it more from an animated kind of style. Like, as much as I don't draw like anime per se, I like the way that they follow the form with their shading, as opposed to like the kind of Disney afternoon where it's like not so much form, but you can see like the outlines of a shadow on somebody, but they don't really follow the edges of the clothes or anything. It's just like a big kind of airbrush shadow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you like the anime style of the shading.
The shading. I think it really pops it more graphically.
Do you think there's certain colors that, I mean, everybody's different, but do you think there are certain colors that are universally, they affect people in a universal way? Like, do you think generally red?
Well, there's generally the concept that warm colors make action, cool colors recede. So if a character is really pissed off, you're probably going to have like bright reds or oranges or yellows in the background. Or if a character is sad or depressed or lonely, you'll have muted like blues and greens or maybe even drained like browns and murky colors. It really depends on what's going on.
But like a matte, like anger, does red, do you think?
Red, violet, things
red?
like
that means
like,
anger.
Yeah, like it's like emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on, like, here's an example. You have something that's supposed to be ironic. It's called the prettiest pony ever. And you give the thing, like, its fur is puke green and its mane is like this ugly salmon pink. Now, it's called ugly color, but it's ironic because it's supposed to be the prettiest pony ever, but you give it the ugliest colors.
Yeah, so colors like green and pink in a certain context would
right
tend to make
if they're
a
all
person
murky,
feel kind of queasy.
Yeah, like if it's all murky and stuff, it's ironic because it's not cute.
Mhm.
You're saying it's the cutest pony ever, but you're being sarcastic. Yeah. So you're using colors that are definitely not cute. Like you see a lot of girls stuff, which it's kind of sad. Everything's pink and pastel and light and muted in that way.
That's always been that's kind of what we're taught. Those are girl colors.
Right. Well, that kind of soft kind of stuff, and then boys' action stuff has a lot of browns, a lot of like army greens and blues. I mean, this isn't a total rule, but you see a lot of the kind of murky colors. It's more saturated and dirty looking.
Yeah.
Whereas anime comes like whatever color's coming out of that tube is what's going on the character.
Mhm.
So I mean,
I totally just thought of something right now. You're talking about these colors. Ronald McDonald.
Right.
That
ketchup and mustard.
Ketchup and mustard. Yeah, he's like ketchup and mustard.
That was the thought. Ketchup and mustard.
Yeah, because he totally looks like ketchup and mustard, and ketchup and mustard are very savory and fun, and people, that's like what a hamburger is. So that's
and they're warm, active colors too, which promotes action.
They're very inviting.
Right.
Like that kind of red, that deep red, and that kind of warm yellow. They're inviting because like my mouth is drooling right now. I feel like getting a
carbs are bad. Carbs are bad.
No, I feel like getting a carbless burger at Carl's Jr.
Oh, that's better than McDonald's.
Well, they got the ketchup, they got the mustard on there, and that was one of the big things, one of their big pushes. Carl's Jr. Remember they said something like it was so good, like it has to be messy or something.
Oh yeah.
So they would have, and it was red and yellow. Those colors, in those commercials.
Right.
Those are very red.
It's a psychological color.
Yeah, red and like lipstick, right? Lipstick, that's supposed to be like inviting too. So certain colors really do, maybe traditionally they elicit these kind of emotions. Like red is maybe real passionate, savory, inviting, and I never thought I used to think green was more pastoral and organic, but I guess a light shade of green, I can see it how it's like pukey, or pink.
Well, if you get like a saturated green, like an olive green.
Yeah.
Once you start mixing colors with it, like browns and oranges, it just kind of makes it putrid looking. Hence the being ironic about the pony thing.
Yeah. Man, I mean,
there's all sorts of books you can find, like Color Bites. It's a book that has a bunch of color combinations. There's tons of Color Bites, like BYTES, Color Bites.
Okay, and that's just that's actually a book that like a textbook or something that's
right for color combinations. There's another one I forget what it's called, but they have certain they'll break down like all the CMYK formulas for art color combinations that you can use.
Let me ask you.
You just got to go out to the art section. Okay,
let me ask you a technical question. When you're doing your colors, do you pick, because you're using Photoshop to color, right?
Mhm.
Do you use, are you like CMYK mode or are you in RGB mode?
I stay in RGB, but then you have a CMYK detector. I think it's like Control Y, and it'll pop up everything that won't print. You'll see the areas that are off, and then you can go back and tweak it, and then convert it to CMYK. It's a lot more RAM intensive when you have CMYK because you have 4 channels of color.
Oh, so that's why you do RGB first. It's less strain on your computer.
Well, I do. I mean, technically, you probably should work in CMYK, but there are ways to get around it. You just have to know that nothing is faithful to your monitor. What you see on the monitor is probably not going to come out in your printer.
Yeah. Well, and then not only that, but I know different printers, will look different. Like you use one printer and your work will look one way. I had a Super Monsters. It was Attack of the Super Monsters that was printed. I had that offset print. And my proof, I had to get a proof because, a digital proof is fine, but that's not necessarily what the print's going to look like. So I went over there to the printer, and they gave me like an actual, physical proof, so I could see how the colors looked, and then I could make changes to my digital file to try to get the colors right.
Right.
I still can't get over Ronald McDonald. So you knew that all along, or?
Yeah, I learned it in graphic design class.
Oh, okay.
I have a degree in graphic design too. With logos and stuff. It's the first thing you want to do is a logo has to catch your eye, and usually if it's color, you have to use something really bright and noticeable.
And
so when people start trying to put illustrations and logos, that it just kills it.
Yeah, it's got to be really simple, very quick and easy to read. And depending on the product that you're trying to push too, right? I mean, Ronald McDonald is perfect because he's selling hamburgers.
Right.
Right? So there's ketchup and mustard.
Yeah, so you wouldn't want it to be purple and green. That'd be kind of weird.
You know what's interesting? The Pillsbury Doughboy. Do you know that one? He's like
a little white thing, and they poke him in the stomach. Yeah.
Yeah. He looks sort of like a snowman or something. But he looks like raw dough,
Yeah.
And I'm thinking right now, I wonder why they didn't just make him kind of like a baked dough.
But he's like dough. Pillsbury Doughboy. Not Pillsbury Biscuit Boy.
There you go, Mary. That's go into marketing. You got a new product right there. You
Very
got
cutthroat in that field.
Pillsbury Biscuit Boy. That even flows off the tongue.
Oh God.
Pillsbury Biscuit Boy. I could see it right now. He'd be all kind of warm and golden. Those colors are very inviting too.
But back to the color theory.
Yeah, sorry about that again.
No. If people really want to learn more about color, pick up like your favorite artist. Like say you really like Nouveau, and do some tests. Try to emulate what they've done with colors. Analyze what they've done at each piece. Like I think Alphonse Mucha or Mucha, I'm not sure how you say it. He had a lot of triptychs and separate section images. Like there's one where he has fall, winter, spring, summer, and the color schemes are very unique to each picture, but they all have a common tying element. There's always this kind of a brown in the background. I mean, pick an image by an artist that you really like, and then see if you can apply it to a character that you've drawn. It's just take a line art drawing and try several different color combinations from several different artists and see what works for you. See what you think is strongest. A lot of the time, what?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just saying, a lot of the time, your first color combinations and things are not going to work. These are just exercises to try and see if you can see a similarity.
Yeah.
And things that would work best.
I was going to say another thing, and I just thought of this right now. Another thing you could do, just to it's something I'm actually going to try to do. This is, I always try to think of exercises that will help me do my, make myself a better artist. And what I'm going to try to do is look at one of my favorite color pieces and ask myself why he used those colors, he or she used those colors.
Right.
And I think that really is something that can help. A really good exercise that a person can do if they're practicing storyboarding or editing.
As they watch TV.
You watch TV, and every time you see, like, just say you're watching a Twilight film or something.
Oh God.
Something more update, like a Fringe, perhaps.
Yes.
Okay, we'll pick Fringe. Just say you're watching Fringe. Watch it every time there's a cut, every time the camera changes to a different angle or something, every time there's a cut, ask yourself, why did they cut? There's always going to be a reason. It's never random. There's always a specific calculated reason why you cut from a wide shot to a tight shot. Maybe it's because you want to show expression or whatever. So I'm thinking I can apply that same idea to studying color. Like if I look at a really good piece, maybe The Scream. The Scream is the famous painting.
Right.
I can say, okay, that's orange. That figure's primarily orange. The background's of this color or this value. Why? What?
Oh, you know the story behind that, don't you?
No.
The artist's mother was suffering from internal hemorrhaging, and that was how he was dealing with the pain from that.
Oh, so he was.
That's why there's a lot of reds and oranges in it. bleeding.
Because of the hemorrhaging. The hemorrhaging.
Right.
Wow. Geez, because I never knew why that was done, but I just knew that it really elicited kind of an emotional response. You look at that and you can just feel it.
Right.
Wow. But I mean, yeah, it's the same thing. It's like, look at something and ask yourself, why did he pick those colors? There's a reason for it. Why is Ronald McDonald yellow and red? Oh, he's selling hamburgers, so that's like ketchup. And, red is inviting, yellow is comforting.
Right.
So that's another thing, Mary, that I always think of. I mean, I like taking classes. I haven't taken a class in a long time. I'm actually probably overdue for taking another class. But, even if you're not taking a class, you don't have the time, you can be your own teacher. Or not your teacher, but you can create your own class,
Right. There's so many resources on the internet. You've got libraries. You've got everything all around you. If you really want it bad enough, you'll push yourself. Like maybe like 6 years ago, I would have never thought I'd actually have done a book,
Mm-hmm.
and now I've done 4.
Yeah.
And I never would have thought that I'd make toys, and now here I've got a toy line.
Now, did you take any classes for making comic books?
No, I had art classes, but I had an opportunity to submit to books, and I did that, but the door kind of closed because the market kind of started to shrink, and there was less and less anthology books out there. So I figured, I'm just going to do it myself. And then when I ended up having all that free time, I said, okay, here's an opportunity to do it, and just jump in there.
But how did you teach yourself to make a comic? Did you just look on the internet, or?
No, I had friends that did their comics and I do a thumbnail and I'll do this, and that, and that's where I started, just thumbnailing and then drawing, and then after I started drawing, I used to draw everything together, but now I just I know what the panel forms are going to be, and then I just draw proportionally and then drop it all into Photoshop and ink it now just completely digitally. It was all just a learning experience because I used to do everything traditionally. But then I had to turn around and clean it up anyway, so it's like, why do an extra step? Just jump in and skip that whole step entirely and just digitally do it.
And then early on when you were doing your first book, was your first book Heck or Faux Facts? It was Faux Facts.
Faux Facts. Faux Facts was the first one because I had basically already drawn all the art, but what I did is I just went back and traced the layouts and then redrew everything.
Okay.
And re-inked it.
And then I guess after looking at maybe prices for the PODs, you just said, I can do this in color. Did you ever think of doing it in black and white?
I thought of it, but I really just wanted to do it in color because every book I had been in at that point was all just black and white. And I'm like, everyone had always said on the internet how much they liked my color stuff. And I'm like, I just want to do color. And then I used Lulu, which is way more pricey than I'll ever use again for comics. But for art books, they're good. But comics, not so much. But I just figured, you know what, I'm just going to try it and see what happens. And people really responded to the colors more than they ever did to the black and white version. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to jump in and do it then.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one thing that really is, I mean, it's just the fact is there's, independent books, there's more black and white books. Like independent comics, self-publishing stuff is primarily black and white. So if you do a color book, it really is going to stand out. I got a book from Mark Rudolph, cvcomics.com. That guy's pretty amazing. He's one half of the art and story team with Jersey Droves.
Right.
And I picked up a book from him, and it's like a color book. And man, right away you feel it.
Yeah, it just seems more professional to have it in color because all the mainstream stuff is in color.
And you know what? But as long as it's done right.
Right.
I mean, I've picked up some mainstream comic books. Books put out by the big names, and they're using color, but it's like a waste. It's like why are they even spending the money to do this in color when they're not using it? They're not utilizing the tool.
It's an expected thing, probably, just the tradition.
I guess so. That's the one thing, because I love working in black and white. I go heavy with the blacks. But one very obvious result of using a lot of black on the page is there's not much page left to color.
Right.
Because it's all black. You know,
right.
You'll get like a sliver, of a face.
Well, that's why they don't use that type of inking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of them do, and then some of them that don't, their values are so dark for the color that it might as well be black and white. That's when you're getting into this really bad computer coloring. The values, I mean, you can have, even if it's red and green or red and yellow, if they're really dark red and dark yellow,
right.
Then it's pretty much just like a black shadow. So, yeah, I guess it really is important to utilize the tool to the fullest,
Right.
And it's not just a matter of I'm going to do a black and white book and then later on say, okay, I'm going to throw some color on it too.
Right. Then it just depends what your audience is. Like I said, mine's kids and kids. Well, primarily kids, but they just the color just pops right off the stand, and they go, "Oh, I'd see your book right off the shelf first thing,"
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I love color. And then also the other reason is because I'd like my stuff to translate to animation someday, whether I have to animate it myself or whatever. But like I want a style that's like same from illustration to comic to animation.
You can recognize the characters in all the different forms. You know what's interesting? I was doing one of my Flash cartoons, or I was starting up a project, and I always liked the old black and white cartoons. And so I thought, well, maybe I should do a black and white Flash cartoon. But I don't know. It just seems very limiting.
Yeah, it is, and it makes you really have to know your values.
Yeah.
You really have to know. Have to know what works. Get the right shades of gray that are not too close to white and not too close to black. And then not use too many, because if you use too many, then it kind of washes out.
Well, do you you're actually you're younger than me, but I remember I used to watch a lot of reruns on TV, and they would show Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, I watched that.
Okay, but they had like the first season was in black and white, and the second season and third season they were in color. Did you ever see the black and white episodes?
I think I have. I know I used to watch The Lone Ranger, which was in black and white.
And that one actually went into color too. I think some of the later seasons.
Everything went into color after color became popular.
But it's really interesting to me because when I would watch Gilligan's Island, those black and white episodes seemed so reserved or something. They just didn't. They didn't seem as exciting. Yeah. And then you see the color ones, and man, the skipper.
Well, it's the difference between seeing the World War II footage that we all see in black and white, and like, oh, it's not real, and then that newly discovered color footage of the same thing, and it just has such a different impact than what we're used to.
Where did you see that? I didn't know they found.
It was on the news. They found some rare color footage of like World War II stuff.
Oh man. That must have been so. Yeah,
it looks so different. It doesn't seem like one of those cheesy movies that you see in history class.
Yeah, it does. It's actually real. You can identify with it because that's real life.
Right.
It's funny whenever I see a picture of like I was talking about Gilligan's Island. I mean, those characters are so well designed. Gilligan's got the red shirt, with the white pants. The skipper's blue. Ginger's kind of got this gold dress. The professor's, he wears white. Those colors are just so, and it fit because those later seasons, the second and third season, they were so wacky. You had scientists transferring brains into, each other, coconut radios and everything. And it just made sense that you would have these really kind of cartoony looking characters in terms of color.
Right.
They look like cartoons. It was like that Gilligan's Island, those seasons, they were like live action cartoons. It was a perfect example of like live action cartoons.
Well, that's like yeah.
Oh no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say it's like in movies. Like when you see a character wearing a green dress, it's not just because it's a green dress, looks good on her. I mean, there's a reason for it. Like if you watch the movie Ghost World, I think it is. The one about the girl who likes this kind of geeky guy who collects records. You just look at the color choices and how it pops, and how it shows the characters for who they are. And Nothing is by chance. All that stuff is done by someone who had to sit and figure out what the set should look like and what the characters should interact. There's a whole sorts of color theories everywhere. So it's not just in comics. It's not just on TV. It's all in our perception and to get us to feel things, to get us to see things or buy things or do things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at Batman. Look at the 1960s Batman. You know, he was Batman, so he had like the blue cape and the cowl and the yellow around his, you know, his little bat signal and the gray. And then you look at the Batman now, and it's basically like this really dark. Gritty. It's all the same color. Yeah, it's a dark kind of brown, dark bluish black costume.
Also, the stories, though, are very different. The 60s is very lighthearted and funny on TV, and the comics now are very dark and earthy and, like, very real and gritty and raw. So that's why they kind of saturated the colors out of it, desaturated it.
Well, I'm thinking, when I think about The Dark Knight, that movie, did you see it, The Dark Knight, by any chance?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Well, that was one of the movies. I think it was kind of like The Matrix or something in terms of the color. It was just, that movie was dark, like right. You know, like visually dark, and you never saw like in the original Batman TV show they had that red phone that would blink when you know I don't think you ever saw that color, that particular shade of red anywhere in that movie.
Right.
You know, you had the evil character in Dark Knight was the Joker. And he had these blood red lips, you know, like a kind of like evil clown.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's certain colors. That's interesting. So that would be a good question for me to ask myself to learn something. You know, why did they never use, you know, the hotline red in Batman? And like you're saying, obviously it's because it's got a darker tone, you know. And the 60s, they had all these really, you know, kind of warm.
Zany.
Yeah, like
it could
be
more
loud,
fun colors than loud colors because that kind of show was very loud with a big pow, kapow, wham, you know, sound effects. It was very.
I mean, yeah, the Batman TV show, I think, was very similar to like Gilligan's Island in terms of color palettes. You know, very, you know, the blue, the red, and the yellow. You know, those, you know, very primary colors, but very prominent primary colors throughout the whole episodes. You know? Huh. That's really fascinating, Mary. I'm learning a lot just talking to you. This is really cool. Oh. Well, let's see. Do you have any other, directions you want to go with this? I just want to go watch Batman and Gilligan's Island now.
Well, you know, if you're really interested in color, just take some time and look at things around you. Like, watch your favorite TV show, watch a movie, pick up some art books. I mean, it doesn't even have to be art. I mean, look at advertising. You know, see how they stage the lights. See how they, you know, pick the font colors. See why they do things. Just analyze it, break it down, and then that
there's a
way.
Reason.
Yeah, there's always a reason. Well, behind good work, there's always a reason. Nothing is just an accident. And
colors really do.
Colors completely can completely change. You know, if something's supposed to be dark and scary, if the guy comes out in pink and yellow polka dots, we're not going to be scared.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if he comes in a dark, murky colors, you're probably going to be like, oh crap. You know.
Yeah, or you know, the Joker. That kind of fits with what you're saying because the Joker, he's a clown. He's an evil clown. How do you make an evil clown? Well, his character design. It's messy. You know how a clown normally has really clear delineated lines for like the mouth and the eyes, big red nose. You know, his was real messy. You know, like the red on his lips is just like smeared on. You know, everything looks smeared. And he's got black around his eyes and he's got this pale face. So he looks more like a zombie than a clown. Like he's like a zombie clown, you know. And that elicits a response. That blood red elicits a response, you know, when it's on that pure white kind of corpse-like face.
Right. So, you know, once you know the rules, once you see what people do, then you can break them. You know, and be ironic like the pony thing I was saying.
Yeah.
You know, once you know what is expected in certain things, then you can play around with it. Like if there's
but you have to understand the theory.
Yeah, you have to know what you're doing first because it's like anything. You have to practice. I wouldn't advise, like, if you've never done anything in color to all of a sudden do a quote-unquote color book and then put it out there because, you know, if you don't really know the basics, it's going to look kind of off. And you really want to just do a lot of practice stuff, just color random illustrations. Just do all sorts of little exercises and things.
Or mini comics. I'm thinking, you know,
well,
if I'd like
mini
to do
comics is a little different than a full, like, 50-page or 100-page book.
Yeah.
You know, you want to get your feet wet. You know, maybe color's not even for you. You know, in the end, you might just say, you know what, my stuff's stronger in black and white. I'll just stick with that. It just depends on who you are.
Yeah, and also, and the kind of story you want to tell. You know,
right.
I'm thinking right now, just talking to you, I'm thinking it would be a great exercise to do like maybe a small mini comic, color mini comic, and, you know, try to use color. You know, like one exercise could be using color to create mood.
Right.
You know, and then another exercise, like to create a sad mood. Like, how would I color a sad story? You know, and maybe just make an 8-page sad story in color. And then, maybe the next one, how do I make a mini comic but a happy mini comic? You know, and how would I use color to make you happy? And then how would I use color to make, you know, to show anger, you know, like red or whatever.
Right.
That's something I've never really thought of color in terms of how it, you know, will affect like a person's mood. I've always just sort of thought, well, that looks neat. You know, I love old comic books, and I love the color palettes they used on the old comics. I don't know what they made me feel, but I thought they looked good. You know, and so then whenever I do a cover, I just try to use those same, kind of like what you're saying. Like if I see a really great color palette on a cover, then I'll just try to copy that color palette. You know, not necessarily the same images, but maybe they use a lot of like warm reds and purples and browns or something and yellows. So I'll just use those same colors. But I never thought about really using color, you know, like it could be used, like to really create a mood. I think I got my class lesson. I got my homework.
It whetted your appetite for color.
It did, and I know what the homework I should do. You know, I think. Oh well, thanks, Mary. That's this was really good. Like I said, I wanted to talk to you about this because you're one of the few, you know, publishers I know that actually works in color. You know, for the whole books that you put out.
Right.
And your stuff it looks great. It's amazing. You showed me that new stuff, and it's like, whoa.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's like, geez, that totally works. And when you're telling me how, you know, each chapter had a dominant color, I thought, man, there's more to this. You know, there's there's a reason to this. You know, you have a purpose for everything. It's not just happenstance.
Right.
So. Well, thanks, man.
Hey, no
I appreciate it. Yeah. And okay, well, hey, let's wrap this up. So one more time, tell people where they can see you on the internet, as well as if you want to plug like any events you're doing. Okay.
Well, you can find me at marybellamy.com. I'm over on DeviantArt under Rainbow Ice, no O in the rainbow, at rainbowicedeviantart.com. I'm on Twitter under Zorilita. We're going to be having a show for the Girls Drawin Girls on the 9th up in Burbank. Sugar and Spice to celebrate our Volume 3 book. I have 4 pieces in the book of sexy ladies and desserts. My theme was a cheesecake. I'm going to be at San Diego Comic-Con, so if you're going, stop on by to the small press section. I'll be at table N4, Zorilita, Mary Bellamy. I have original artist trading cards, buttons, new plush dolls, 4 books. I have volumes 1 and 2 of Faux Facts and volumes 1 and 2 of Ah Heck. Wow. And or if you just want to say hey, that's cool too. So I enjoyed being on tonight.
Okay, cool. And you got those plush toys, right? You're going to have all those plush toys with you too?
I'm praying that they get here. I at least have 1 box of Dvorak, the black one with bat wings.
Yeah, well, that's my favorite. So
yeah.
Dvorak's pretty cool. Okay.
Oh, and they have little mini, and they come with little mini comics. So if you're wondering where the characters come from, you get a free mini comic.
And they're in color.
Yes.
They're in color. Okay, well, thanks again, Mary. Everybody, you guys got even a fraction of information of what I feel like I'm ready to learn. So thanks again for listening. You can see my stuff at tedseko.com. And that's it. All right.
All right.
Later,
Bye.
everybody. Okay, see you, Mary. Thanks again.
Bye.
Good night. All right, let's see if I could terminate this call.